Good morning. I hope you're all enjoying the second Smart Freight Week. I'm very sorry that I can't be there myself, but I'm grateful to the Smart Freight Centre for giving me the opportunity of at least having a virtual presence at the event. They've asked me to give a short presentation of what I think are the knowledge and skills that will be required to manage the decarbonisation of logistics, and also to discuss some of the related training issues. I'd like to begin by putting the subject into a broader perspective, because it's been argued now for several years that the management of logistics and supply chains is being inhibited by skill shortages, and a difficulty that many companies are having in recruiting people with the right capabilities. We put these claims to the test several years ago in a study that we did for the World Bank at a global level, reviewing skill requirements and skill shortages. Our report since then has had over 16,000 downloads, which I think is a measure of the level of interest that there is in this subject. And one of our conclusions was that as logistics and supply chain management evolve and are subject to increasing internal and external pressures, so the required skill set will change, and the curricula of courses will have to be modified. And I always think it's rather surprising that if one looks at the huge amount of research and discussion there has been on the subject of decarbonising logistics, very little reference is actually made to the skills and competences required by managers to cut emissions in this sector. Another study that we did in my university, the Kuhn Logistics University in Hamburg, we did in association with the European Freight and Logistics Leaders Forum, where we asked around 90 senior logistics executives in Europe about the decarbonisation of their logistics, and one question related to what they thought were the skill requirements. As you can see, a third of the respondents reckoned there was a very strong need to increase the managerial skills in the area of sustainable logistics, and indeed only 10% of the managers that we surveyed felt that the current skill levels were adequate. We also asked them to indicate what they thought were the main areas of skill acquisition in this area, and here I have ranked them in terms of the frequency of mention. So the first was giving managers a general appreciation of the various methods that you can apply to improve the environmental sustainability of logistics. Second was equipping managers with more specific skills relating to the measurement and the reporting of those emissions. Third was, as you can see, building a general knowledge of sustainability and looking at macro level trends and some of the key sustainability indicators. The fourth was in helping managers develop the ability to change business practices, to alter mindsets, to promote buy-in within their organisation across different stakeholder groups, to convince them of the importance of sustainability. And then the final one, which got the least mentions but arguably would perhaps be the most important, which is giving them the ability to develop a sustainability strategy, and also to manage the trade-offs between environmental sustainability and other corporate objectives. What I've also done recently in a book chapter that was just published a few months ago is look at what I think are the skill requirements for managers busy decarbonising their logistics operations, and there are 10 of these skill requirements in total. The first is what I call an appreciation of the climate science, because I think one really has to fully appreciate why it is we're now devoting so much time, effort and money to cut carbon emissions in this sector, and to give managers the ability to explain to staff why decarbonisation must be prioritised, and to properly motivate them, and also perhaps to counter any sort of climate sceptical views that still remain within organisations. Second skill requirement, I think, is to understand the greenhouse gas emission processes in logistics, to know where the greenhouse gases originate, and to see where the emission hotspots are within the organisation. I think it's also helpful these days to have a knowledge of the chemistry and physics of the different types of energy used in logistics. Third skill relates to the auditing of logistics emissions. To be able to install, manage a system of logistics carbon measurement, an awareness of the various methodologies, emission factor databases, the reporting standards, software tools, and also the data requirements of both internal and external users of logistics emissions data. The fourth is to develop an ability to set meaningful, realistic targets for cutting emissions from logistics. This, it seems to me, requires familiarity with target setting methodologies, and particularly those of the Science-Based Targeting Initiative. The fifth skill, I think, is to be able to respond to government initiatives in this area. Climate-related public policy initiatives are now coming thick and fast at a local, national, European and global level. And it seems to me that managers need to be able to assess the implications of these public interventions, both for the business, but also perhaps to try to gain some competitive advantage by anticipating future policy shifts. Then the sixth skill is a fairly obvious one: ability to review all the logistics decarbonisation options. As I'm sure you will be well aware, there are a whole plethora of technical, operational, behavioural measures that can be deployed here. Managers need to be made aware of them, and also their applicability to different types of logistics operation. They need to know something about the relative ease of implementation and also the potential carbon savings that they can yield. My next skill set relates to technology. Given the very rapid rate of technological development in this field, it's beneficial, it seems to me, to have a knowledge of the hardware and software innovations. So that I'm talking here about the engineering aspects of vehicle design, warehouse construction, materials handling, but also the software developments, particularly the carbon impacts of the digitalization of logistics processes, which is now well underway. My next skill set relates to economics. Because obviously all businesses will want to decarbonise as cost effectively as possible, and therefore I think managers need to know a bit about the marginal abatement cost analysis to be able to compare the relative cost implications of different ways of decarbonising logistics. They may develop the competence to do that themselves, or at least they could perhaps commission others to do that type of economic analysis, and in which case they have to be able to interpret the results of that analysis. My ninth skill set relates to sourcing the capital that will be required to fund logistics decarbonisation. Many aspects of the decarbonisation of logistics, particularly involving the acquisition of a new generation of low carbon vehicles, will be expensive and will rely heavily on external sources of funding. Being able to access green finance to secure loans and grants at competitive rates, it seems to me, will be important. And then finally, managing the decarbonisation process. The whole process of change management is going to be demanding, because to achieve deep carbon reductions quickly enough will require radical changes. And it seems to me that this will severely stress test the change management capabilities of the current generation of logistics professionals. Then finally, I'd like to address some of the education and training issues. having set up a master's course in logistics and supply chain management in my previous university in Edinburgh back in 1997, and then being the first dean of programs at Cuneo Logistics University in 2012, I'm well familiar with these issues that have to be resolved when one is establishing new courses and training initiatives. So one of the first things is you've got to decide what type of course it is we're talking about in terms of the lens, its focus, its specialism, content, the assessment methods, if any at all. You've got to think, what is the target audience? Are we pitching this training in decarbonisation skills for logistics at students or new recruits, or is it existing managers that really need to be upskilled, perhaps as part of a lifelong learning or what we call continuous professional education? Are we going to award degrees, certificates, diplomas to recognise the skills that have been acquired and also to offer recognition for the time and effort that has gone into the training? And also, I mean, there are many providers of this training, obviously based in a university. There are colleges, there are training agencies engaged, NGOs like the Smart Freight Centre now want to play a more active role in this area. So where should they be positioning themselves in this new training environment? Hopefully this can be done in a complementary way with the development of partnerships, but there's also competition. I mean, there's currently cutthroat competition between universities really to get students into their courses. How are these courses going to be resourced? Where are we going to find adequate supply of qualified trainers? What about the teaching material? Again, I've spent much of my academic life developing teaching material for courses in forms of textbooks and articles and even videos. What about the accreditation of these programs, which will be required to ensure that certain standards are maintained and that these are consistent? And there's a role here clearly for professional organisations, but maybe all government agencies may well be involved in that process. We've got to think of the mode of delivery. Is these new training courses going to be classroom based? Will it be online? It could be work based, or a mix of all of these things, and what we call hybrid training. In the post-pandemic world, thankfully, we're better able, I think, to deliver courses more flexibly. It seems to me this has been one of the beneficial effects of the pandemic on the educational sector. And then finally, what about what I call inter-company networking? Because these companies can attract managers from different companies, and their interaction, I think, enriches the educational experience. They can share examples of best practice, for example, but one always has to be careful that one doesn't fall foul of competition rules. So this has to be managed, I think, in a rather careful way. So these are some of the issues that perhaps the panel discussion that's going to follow this presentation may wish to address. So I hope that you found this very short presentation of interest. Here are some of my wares. I mean, as I say, I've mentioned textbooks. So there's one on green logistics. There's my decarbonisation logistics book, published in 2018. There's also the book chapter I mentioned recently, and you can download the relevant section of that chapter where I discuss the skill requirements to decarbonise logistics. And finally, I feel I should also plug a new course that my university in Hamburg has just launched. It's a master programme in sustainable management and operations, known by the acronym SUMO, but I can assure you there is no module in the course on wrestling. Anyway, enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you for your attention.